Episode 1. The Sky That Still Answered. The Last Age of Alignment. The sky above Mesopotamia has not changed in 12,000 years. The same stars, the same movements, the same predictable dance of celestial mechanics that governs planting seasons, flood cycles, and the rhythm of human life. But this is not the whole truth. The sky has changed. It simply changed so slowly that no single human lifetime could perceive it. The drift is measured in generations, in the cumulative observations of priest astronomers who inherit star tables carved in stone, who compare their grandfathers' measurements against their own, who see discrepancies measured in fractions of degrees and know, with a certainty that borders on dread, that something fundamental is shifting. This is the world of 10,000 BCE. Not the primitive dawn of civilization you were taught. Not the age of hunter-gatherers stumbling toward agriculture. This is the end of something older. Act 1. The World That Still Works. Part 1. Morning in the Fourth City. The initiate wakes before dawn, as always. Not by choice. Not by discipline. But because his body knows, with an accuracy that no water clock can match, the precise moment when the eastern horizon begins its transition from absolute darkness to the first imperceptible lightning that precedes true sunrise. His name is in Merkur, though he will not be called by this name for another hour. In the pre-dawn darkness of the sleeping quarters, he is simply one of 17 initiates who occupy the third level of the eastern ziggurat, 47 steps above the city floor, 23 steps below the first operational chamber. The numbers matter. Everything here is numbered. Everything is positioned. The ziggurats themselves are not monuments. They are instruments. Each step is measured. Each chamber aligned. The entire structure is a physical embodiment of celestial mathematics, and to live within it is to exist inside a functioning machine that you only partially understand. In Merkur rises from his sleeping mat, woven reed, replaced monthly, positioned exactly north-south with his head oriented toward the polar axis, and performs the first alignment of the day. He does not pray. Prayer will come later, in the public ceremonies where language and symbolism replace precision with approximation. But here, alone, in the darkness that precedes dawn, he performs the private ritual that all initiates learn in their first year. Stand facing east. Feet shoulder-width apart. Hands at sides. Breathe in for a count of 4. Hold for a count of 7. Exhale for a count of 8. This is not meditation. This is calibration. The human body, when properly trained, becomes sensitive to things that instruments cannot measure. Subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field. Minute fluctuations in atmospheric pressure. The almost imperceptible hum that seems to emanate from the deep chambers far below. A vibration that is felt more than heard, that resonates in bone rather than ear. In Merkur breathes and feels. Today something is wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. But wrong in the way that a musical note can be wrong, perfectly audible, technically present, but somehow out of tune with everything around it. He cannot articulate what he feels. He learned years ago not to try. The senior priests do not want descriptions of sensation. They want predictions. They want yes or no. They want the alignment will hold, or the alignment will fail. They do not want the air tastes of copper, or the stones feel thirsty, or any of the other useless observations that marked in Merkur as someone who could sense but not explain. He stands in the darkness and knows that today will be difficult. By the time the first bell sounds, a deep bronze tone that reverberates through the entire structure, 17 initiates are standing in perfect formation on the observation platform, facing east, waiting for the moment of solar emergence. This is not worship. This is measurement. Each initiate holds a simple instrument, a straight rod shoulder height, marked with gradations that represent angular measurements. As the sun rises, They will note its position relative to fixed reference points on the horizon. Stone markers placed generations ago, checked and rechecked and verified against records that stretch back beyond memory. The senior priest, Lugalbanda, stands apart from the initiates. He is 63 years old, which makes him ancient by the standards of this age. He has overseen this observation for 42 years. He has trained 7 generations of initiates. He has witnessed 3 significant alignment anomalies, each dutifully recorded, each successfully compensated for through adjustment of the operational schedules. He does not look at the initiates. He looks at the horizon. The sun emerges precisely where it should. Lugalbanda nods. Once. The initiates lower their measuring rods. The observation is complete. Another successful morning alignment. Another confirmation that the celestial mechanics remain stable, that the ancient calculations still hold, that the world continues to operate according to principles established long before anyone alive can remember. In Merkur says nothing about the wrongness he feels. This is not cowardice. This is learned wisdom. 3 times in his initiation he reported sensations before the instruments detected anomalies. 3 times he was correct. 3 times he was punished for speaking without authorization. The 4th time he stayed silent, and the anomaly appeared 2 days later, and he was punished for not reporting what he had sensed. This is the logic of hierarchy. This is the impossible position of those who can feel but cannot speak, who can sense but cannot prove, who exist in the gap between intuition and authority. So in Merkur stays silent and follows the others down 47 steps to the morning meal. Part 2. The Architecture of Function. Let us pause here and understand what we are looking at. The ziggurat is not a temple in the way you understand temples. It is not primarily a place of worship, though worship happens here. It is not primarily a political structure, though political power flows through it. It is, first and foremost, a machine built from stone and bronze and human labor. A machine that operates on principles that its current operators only partially understand. A machine inherited from an older age, maintained through rigorous discipline, operated according to procedures that have been refined over centuries but never fully explained. The city below, what we will call the 4th city, though it has no formal name in the way later civilizations will name their cities, extends for approximately 3 kilometers in a rough circular pattern around the central ziggurat. Population estimates are difficult, but perhaps 15,000 people live within the immediate urban zone, with another 30,000 in the surrounding agricultural region. These are not small numbers. This is not a village. This is an organized, stratified, functioning society with specialized labor, agricultural surplus, and most importantly, institutional memory. The ziggurat itself rises in 7 stages. Each stage is smaller than the one below, creating the characteristic stepped pyramid that will echo through Mesopotamian architecture for millennia to come. But the aesthetics are secondary. The shape is functional. Each level serves a specific purpose. Level 1. Storage and foundation. Deep chambers that extend below ground level, where the oldest mechanisms still hum with a sound that no one alive remembers activating. These are the chambers that were here before the city. The chambers that the city was built around, not upon. Level 2. Administration and archives. Clay tablets, star tables, maintenance logs. Everything recorded, everything cross-referenced, everything preserved because the first law of the society is, the system must be documented even if it cannot be fully understood. Level 3. Initiate quarters. Living space for those in training, those learning to feel the subtle pressures and resonances that indicate system health. Levels 4 and 5. Operational chambers. The rooms where actual work happens. Where alignments are calculated, where instruments are calibrated, where the delicate rituals that keep the system functioning are performed daily, hourly, continuously. Level 6. Senior priest quarters and restricted archives. Knowledge that is not for initiates. Procedures that are taught only after years of proven reliability. Level 7. The observation platform and the sealed chamber. We will return to the sealed chamber later. For now, know only that it exists, that it has not been opened in living memory, and that it figures prominently in the forbidden histories that archivists whisper about but never record. The morning meal is eaten in silence. This is not religious observance. This is practical efficiency. The initiates have work to do, and conversation is a distraction from the internal calibration that each must perform continuously. In Merkur eats bread, unleavened, dense, made from emmer wheat that was harvested 3 months ago and stored in the underground granaries where temperature and humidity are naturally regulated by the thermal mass of the ziggurat itself. He eats dates, from the groves to the south, where irrigation channels follow patterns that were old when the current city was young. He drinks water, from the deep wells that tap into aquifers fed by mountain snowmelt 200 kilometers to the north. Nothing is random. Everything is system. Even the food is part of the operational framework. After the meal, assignments are posted. This is done without ceremony. A senior priest simply stands and reads from a clay tablet, listing names and tasks in a flat administrative tone that acknowledges no hierarchy beyond pure function. In Merkur, subsurface monitoring. Chamber 7, third watch. There is a brief silence. Several initiates glance at Merkur, then quickly away. Chamber 7 is not dangerous. Nothing in the ziggurat is outright dangerous if protocols are followed, but it is uncomfortable. It is one of the deep chambers, one of the spaces that predates the city, one of the rooms where the hum is strongest and the air tastes of metal and something else that has no name. In Merkur nods once, acknowledging the assignment. Lugal Banda, the senior priest, watches this exchange with an expression that might be calculation or might be concern. It is difficult to tell. The old man has spent 4 decades learning to show nothing. The day proceeds according to schedule. Which means, the day proceeds according to ancient schedule, modified by accumulated observations, adjusted for known drift factors, and implemented with ritualized precision that borders on obsession. At the second hour, celestial observations from the eastern platform. 17 initiates with measuring instruments, comparing angles, recording deviations measured in finger widths and handspans. At the 4th hour, maintenance inspection of the bronze mechanisms on level 5. These are not decorative. These are functional instruments, gears and levers and weights that regulate water flow through internal channels, that mark time through hydraulic precision, that serve purposes that are understood procedurally even when they are not understood theoretically. At the 6th hour, the first alignment operation of the day. This is where technology stops being abstract and becomes visible. Part 3. Operation and Ritual. The alignment chamber on level 5 is circular, approximately 12 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that features an opening precisely aligned with celestial north. The floor is marked with concentric circles and radial lines, a geometric mandala that serves as both calculation tool and operational interface. At the center, a vertical shaft that descends into the lower levels, perhaps 20 meters deep. Perhaps more. The bottom is not visible from this chamber, only darkness and that persistent, omnipresent hum. Around the perimeter, 7 stations, each equipped with instruments that look like hybrid offspring of astronomical tools and musical instruments. Vertical tubes of varying lengths. Bronze plates suspended on fine chains. Crystal prisms mounted on articulated arms. This is not decoration. This is not symbolism. This is a functional interface with something older than anyone present. 6 priests take their positions at 6 of the 7 stations. They are all senior operators, men and women who have performed this procedure hundreds of times, who know the sequence so thoroughly that their hands move with the unconscious precision of master craftspeople. The seventh station remains empty. It has been empty for 3 years, since the last priest qualified to operate it died without successfully training a replacement. The system can function with 6 operators, though efficiency is reduced. Precision suffers. But it functions. Lugal Banda stands outside the circle, observing. This is his role now. He no longer operates, he supervises. He watches for deviations, for hesitations, for the subtle signs that indicate an operator is losing calibration. The operation begins with sound. The first priest strikes a bronze plate with a small hammer. A pure tone rings out, surprisingly clear, surprisingly loud. It reverberates through the chamber, through the stone, through the bones of everyone present. The second priest responds by adjusting a vertical tube, sliding a bronze collar along its length until it resonates in harmony with the first tone. When the frequencies align, a second note emerges, not struck, but induced. The tube is singing. The third priest works with a crystal prism, rotating it on its mount until it catches light from the ceiling aperture and projects a specific pattern onto the floor markings. This continues, each priest adding their element to the growing symphony of sound and light and geometric precision. It is half orchestra, half calculation, half ritual. And yes, that's 3 halves, because this is something that doesn't fit into neat categories. To an outside observer it would look like religion. To the priests performing it, it is engineering. The sounds build, harmonics layering upon harmonics, until the chamber is filled with a chord that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, that makes the air vibrate, that makes the stone itself seem to resonate. And then, from the central shaft, something responds. It is not a sound exactly. It is not a vibration exactly. It is something that exists in the space between sound and sensation, a pressure wave that moves through matter without displacing it, that can be felt but not measured. The priests know this moment. They have trained for years to recognize it, to maintain their positions through it, to continue the operation without hesitation. The response means alignment achieved, synchronization established. The local system is connected to something larger, something that extends beyond this city, beyond this region, beyond what any single human can comprehend. The operation continues for precisely 47 minutes, not estimated, but measured by water clocks that have been calibrated against celestial movements since before the current city was built. And then, with careful precision, the priests reverse the sequence. The sounds diminish. The light patterns fade. The pressure from the central shaft withdraws. The operation is complete. Lugal Banda nods. Acceptable. Deviation within tolerance. Log the results. One of the younger priests makes marks on a clay tablet, recording observations in the dense technical notation that serves as the operational language of the ziggurat. Not words exactly. Not numbers exactly. A hybrid script that encodes both quantitative measurements and qualitative observations in a system that takes years to master. The priests leave the chamber in order of seniority, as protocol demands. In Merkur, watching from the entrance where initiates are permitted to observe but not participate, notices something that the others seem to miss. The operation was successful. The alignment was achieved. But it took longer than usual. Not by much, perhaps 30 seconds, but the response from the central shaft was delayed. Hesitant, like a person pausing before answering a question they should know by rote. He files this observation away, knowing better than to voice it, and proceeds to his own assignment. Part 4. The Deep Chambers. Subsurface monitoring is not glamorous work. It consists primarily of walking through the lower chambers with a clay tablet, recording temperature readings, humidity levels, and observing the state of the ancient mechanisms that still operate in the darkness below the city. The mechanisms are the mystery at the heart of everything. They were not built by anyone alive. They were not built by anyone's grandparents. They were not built by anyone whose names are remembered. They exist in the historical record only as the inheritance, or the foundation, or what was already here. They are mechanisms without builders, technology without origin story. In Merkur descends the narrow stairway that leads from level 1 into the true depths. The stairs are worn smooth by countless feet over countless generations. The walls are stone, not the brick and mud brick of the upper levels, but solid stone. Carved stone. Stone that shows tool marks but no indication of what tools could have made those particular marks. The air changes as he descends. Cooler. Drier. With that metallic taste that has no source. At the bottom. Chamber 7. It is larger than it should be. The mathematics don't work. The foundation of the ziggurat above is not large enough to contain a space this size. And yet here it is, a roughly circular chamber approximately 30 meters in diameter, with a ceiling that rises into darkness beyond the reach of lamplight. In the center of the chamber, the mechanism. It is impossible to describe adequately. Language fails because the categories fail. It is not quite stone and not quite metal. It has the color of bronze but the density of something far heavier. It has geometric precision but organic curves. It looks simultaneously ancient and somehow fresh, unworn, as if time does not touch it the way it touches everything else. The mechanism consists of 3 primary elements. A central column, roughly 2 meters in diameter, that rises from the floor and extends upward into the darkness. Its surface is covered in markings. Not writing, not decoration, but something in between. Patterns that suggest meaning without conveying it. Surrounding the column, 7 smaller pillars, arranged in a perfect heptagon. Each pillar is perhaps half a meter in diameter, each exactly the same height, each connected to the central column by structures that might be bridges or conduits or something that has no name in any human language. And throughout the entire space, a network of what looks like veins or channels running through the floor, up the walls, across the ceiling. Not carved into the stone, embedded in it, fused with it, as if the stone grew around them rather than being carved to contain them. The hum is louder here. Not painfully loud, but present, constant. A vibration that seems to come from the mechanism itself, or perhaps from beneath it, or perhaps from somewhere else entirely, and this is just where it becomes audible. In Merkur performs his assigned task with mechanical efficiency. He circles the chamber, stopping at marked positions, recording observations on his tablet. Temperature. Stable. Unchanged from previous measurements. Humidity. Stable. The air is dry, always dry, regardless of seasonal flooding above. Mechanism status. Visually unchanged. No signs of degradation, corrosion, or damage. He should complete his circuit and return to the upper levels. He has been trained to observe, record, and depart. Do not linger. Do not experiment. Do not touch. But in Merkur pauses at the central column. There is something different about it today. Not visually different. It looks exactly as it always looks. But the feeling is different. The subtle pressure that emanates from it, the quality of the hum, the way the air moves around it. It feels muted, like a bell struck with cloth wrapped around the clapper. The tone is there but dampened, present but suppressed. He reaches out, slowly, and places his palm flat against the surface of the column. This is absolutely forbidden. Not forbidden in the sense of religious taboo. Forbidden in the sense of operational protocol. Do not introduce variables. Do not contaminate observations with direct contact. Do not touch what you do not understand. But in Merkur touches anyway, because he has learned that sometimes the body knows things before the mind can articulate them, and his body is telling him, something is wrong here. The surface is warm. Not hot, but noticeably warm in the cool air of the chamber. And beneath the warmth, that vibration. Stronger here at the point of contact, resonating up through his arm into his shoulder, settling somewhere in his chest that is not quite his heart and not quite his lungs, but somewhere in between. And for just a moment, less than a heartbeat, less than a breath, he feels something else. A sense of vast distance. As if the column is not an object in this chamber but a conduit extending through space that is not quite physical space, connecting this location to others that are simultaneously impossibly far away and somehow right here, overlapping this reality like layers of translucent fabric. He feels other places, other chambers, other cities, a network that once spanned, he cannot tell, continents, the world, beyond, and he feels the breaks in that network, the dead zones, the places where connection has been lost, where the vast machine that underlies everything has begun to fail. Not dramatically, not catastrophically, but piece by piece, link by link, a slow degradation that has been occurring for generations, for centuries, for millennia. The system is dying. Not today. Not this year. Perhaps not in his lifetime. But dying nonetheless. Merker withdraws his hand and steps back from the column. His heart racing, his breath shallow. He has just sensed something he was not supposed to sense. Understood something he was not supposed to understand. And worse, he now knows with absolute certainty that the senior priests already know this. They know the system is failing. They have known for generations. And they have chosen to maintain it anyway, to operate it anyway, to train new initiates and perform the daily rituals and record the measurements as if none of this knowledge exists. Because what else can they do? He completes his inspection, records his observations in the approved format that mentions nothing unusual, and climbs the narrow stairs back to the inhabited levels. Behind him, in the darkness, the mechanism continues its slow, patient dissolution. Act 2. The Sensitivity of Outcasts. Part 5. The Politics of Perception. Evening in the ziggurat follows patterns as rigid as the morning. Communal meal at the 9th hour. Public ritual at the 10th hour. Personal study time until the 12th hour. Sleep by the 13th hour, when the night sky reaches optimal observation angles and the senior priests ascend to the 7th level for work that initiates are not yet cleared to witness. But tonight, Merker cannot focus on any of this. He sits in the common room with the other initiates, a space on the 3rd level where off-duty hours are spent in activities that are rigorously supervised despite appearing casual. There are games, board games with complex rules that double as calculation exercises. There is music, not for entertainment, but for training in harmonic recognition. There is even conversation, though it is carefully modulated, carefully observed, carefully logged by the attending priest who sits in the corner and maintains the endless records that document every aspect of ziggurat life. Merker is not participating. He sits near the eastern window. Windows are rare in the ziggurat, present only where ventilation is operationally necessary, and stares out at the city below. From this height, the 4th city looks almost peaceful. Cooking fires create small pools of light in the gathering darkness. The irrigation channels reflect the last light of sunset in geometric patterns that mirror the circles and lines marked on the floors above. People move through the streets in patterns that are not random, that follow routes established by necessity and reinforced by habit until they become almost ritualized. Everyone in the city below lives according to the schedules set by the ziggurat. When to plant, when to harvest, when the floods will come, when they will recede. The ziggurat does not rule through force. There are no soldiers, no police, no mechanism of violence beyond the basic human potential for conflict. The ziggurat rules through knowledge, through the maintenance of systems that everyone depends on but only a few understand. This is power that looks like service. This is authority that presents itself as technical competency. And in Merkur, watching the city from above, wonders what will happen when that knowledge proves insufficient. You touched it. The voice comes from behind him. Not accusatory. Simply stating fact. In Merkur turns to find Nin's son standing in the doorway. She is another initiate, perhaps 2 years ahead of him in training, marked as one of the most promising candidates for eventual priesthood. Where in Merkur is marginal, kept at the edges, used for his sensitivity but never fully trusted, Nin's son is central, respected, on track for advancement. They have barely spoken in 3 years. Touched what? In Merkur asks, though he knows exactly what she means. The mechanism in Chamber 7. You made direct contact. Against protocol. In Merkur considers lying. Considers claiming he only observed, that she is mistaken, that the distance from the doorway where she must have been watching would make exact observation impossible. But Nin's son is not someone who makes mistakes. Yes, he says simply. She steps fully into the common room. The other initiates glance up, register her presence, then studiously return to their activities. When Nin's son moves, people notice. When she speaks, people listen. This is not official hierarchy, she holds no rank above the others, but it is social reality nonetheless. And what did you feel? She asks. This is the unexpected question. Not why did you break protocol, or are you aware of the consequences? But what did you feel? As if she already knows there was something to feel. In Merkur chooses his words carefully. The connection is weakening. Not critically. Not immediately. But the degradation is measurable. Nin's son nods slowly. And you think this is new information? Isn't it? In Merkur. She says his name with something that might be pity or might be frustration. The senior priests have known about systemic degradation since before either of us was born. Before our teachers were born. It's in the restricted archives. It's in the maintenance logs. It's documented, analyzed, and accepted as unchangeable. Then why don't they do something about it? Because there is nothing to do. The system was not built by us. It cannot be repaired by us. We are caretakers of something we inherited, not engineers who can modify the design. All we can do is maintain what remains and document the decline. She moves to the window, standing beside him, looking out at the same view. You were assigned to Chamber 7 because you're sensitive. Because you can feel things before instruments detect them. This is valuable. But it's also why you'll never advance to senior priest. I don't understand. Sensitivity makes you useful for monitoring, but it also makes you unreliable for command. You feel too much. You question too much. You touch things you're told not to touch because your intuition tells you to. And you don't. Ninson's expression is difficult to read. I learned to stop trusting intuition over instruction. It's a necessary discipline if you want to be part of the central hierarchy rather than a specialized tool that hierarchy uses. There is something in her voice, not quite bitterness, not quite resignation. Something more complex. You used to be like me, in Merkur says. It's not a question. Everyone sensitive starts out like you. And then we make a choice. Integrate or remain peripheral. I chose integration. You. She pauses. You're still choosing. Every day. Every time you follow your instincts over protocol. What happens if I keep choosing this way? You become permanently marginal. Used for your sensitivity but never trusted with authority. You'll spend your life in the deep chambers, monitoring what no one else can feel, reporting to people who have learned to ignore their own senses in favor of procedure. And the alternative? Learn to feel less. Or learn to pretend you feel less. Same result. Merker looks at her carefully. You still feel it, don't you? The degradation. The wrongness. You just don't say anything. Nin-sun doesn't answer immediately. When she does, her voice is very quiet. What good would saying something do? The system fails whether we acknowledge it or not. Better to maintain function as long as possible than to create panic over something we cannot prevent. Is it panic if it's true? Truth without solution is just despair. This is the logic of the hierarchy. This is how knowledge becomes compartmentalized, how observation becomes separated from action, how those who sense problems are kept separate from those who make decisions. Because if the sensitive ones were in charge, they would have to admit that the situation is deteriorating. And if they admitted that, they would have to admit that they cannot fix it. And if they admitted that, the entire structure of authority based on technical competency, on the ability to maintain the system, would collapse. Better to keep the sensitive ones at the edges. Use them as early warning sensors. But never let them near actual power. Nin-sun leaves without saying goodbye. Merker remains at the window long after the light fades completely, watching the city below operate according to schedules it does not understand, maintained by systems that are slowly failing, governed by people who know the truth but have chosen not to speak it. He wonders if this is wisdom or cowardice. He suspects it might be both. Part 6. The dream that was not a dream. That night, Merker does not sleep properly. He lies on his mat in the precise north-south orientation, performs his evening calibration routine, regulates his breathing according to the trained patterns. But sleep, when it comes, is not restful. He dreams. Or perhaps he does not dream. Perhaps something else is happening, something that uses the language of dreams because humans have no other language for this kind of experience. He is in Chamber 7, but not Chamber 7 as it exists now. He is in Chamber 7 as it existed. When? Before the city. Before the ziggurat. Before humans lived here at all. The chamber is the same physical space, but it is clean. Pristine. The mechanism in the center is not worn or ancient. It looks new, or rather, it looks like something that never ages, that exists outside the normal flow of time. And the chamber is not empty. There are figures here. Not human. Not quite. They have a shape that suggests human form. 2 arms, 2 legs, vertical posture. But the proportions are wrong in ways that are difficult to articulate. Too tall. Too thin. No, it's more subtle than that. It's as if they exist in slightly more dimensions than the 3-dimensional space can properly contain, and what he's seeing is just the part of them that intersects with normal reality. They are working on the mechanism. Not building it, it already exists. But calibrating it, adjusting it, connecting it to something larger. One of the figures turns toward him. It has no face. Not in the sense of a blank surface, but in the sense that what he's looking at is not meant to be perceived visually. There are other senses needed here, senses he doesn't have, and his mind is trying to interpret the uninterpretable through visual metaphor. The figure does not speak, does not gesture, but information flows anyway. Not words, not images, pure concept. This is a node. It is one of many. It connects to a network that spans this world. The network is old. The network is failing. You are here because you can feel what others cannot. This makes you dangerous to those who wish to maintain order. This makes you necessary for those who wish to preserve knowledge. A choice is coming. Not today, but soon. When the sky hesitates, you will understand. And then the vision, the dream, the whatever it was, collapses, and Merker wakes on his mat, breathing hard, sweat-soaked despite the cool air of the sleeping chamber. The other initiates are still asleep. The night continues its scheduled progression toward dawn. But something has changed. Merker sits up slowly, carefully, not wanting to wake the others. He performs his calibration breathing, 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out, and tries to analyze what just happened. Was it a dream? His training tells him to be skeptical of subjective experiences, to trust only what can be measured and verified. But his training also tells him to pay attention to sensitivity, to trust the body's perception of subtle signals that instruments cannot detect. And his body is telling him, that was not a dream. That was contact. The visitors, the ones who appear in the forbidden histories, who are mentioned in whispered conversations between archivists, who are officially denied by the senior priests, the visitors are real. And they are still here. Not physically present. Not directly observable. But present nonetheless, in whatever space exists adjacent to normal reality, watching and occasionally communicating with those few humans who are sensitive enough to receive the transmission. Merker realizes, with a clarity that is almost painful, that he has been in training for this moment his entire life. Not training in the sense of conscious preparation. Training in the sense of being shaped, being selected, being positioned. His marginalization is not punishment. It is preparation. The sensitive ones are kept at the edges because the edges are where contact happens. The center is too structured, too hierarchical, too committed to maintaining order. The center cannot afford to acknowledge experiences that don't fit into established frameworks. But the edges can. The edges must. Because when the system fails, and it will fail, everyone with access to the deep knowledge knows this, the edges are where adaptation happens. The edges are where new patterns can emerge. He lies back down but does not sleep again. He watches the darkness and waits for dawn, understanding now that his role is not to advance through the hierarchy. His role is to be present at the periphery, to maintain sensitivity, to remain receptive to signals that others have learned to ignore. He is not being excluded from power. He is being preserved as a receptor, and something is trying to communicate with him. Part 7. The morning after. Dawn arrives exactly on schedule, as it always does. The first bell sounds. 17 initiates rise from their mats and perform their calibration routines. The observation platform fills according to protocol. Measuring rods are raised. The sun emerges from the horizon precisely where calculations predicted it would. Everything is normal. Everything is wrong. Merker goes through the motions with mechanical precision, but his attention is divided. Part of him is performing the assigned tasks. Part of him is still processing the night's experience. And part of him, the sensitive part, the part that got him assigned to the peripheral tasks in the first place, is paying attention to something the others seem to be missing. The alignment is off. Not dramatically. Not enough to show up in the crude angular measurements that the morning observation provides. But off nonetheless. The sun is in the right position. The calculations are accurate. But something about the quality of the sunrise is different. The way the light strikes the observation platform. The way the air feels in the moment of emergence. It's as if reality itself is slightly out of tune. Lugal Banda, the senior priest supervising the observation, notices Merker's distraction. Something to report. All 17 initiates turn to look at Merker. This is not done casually. When a senior priest singles out an initiate during a formal observation, it means something significant is happening. Merker hesitates. He has been punished before for reporting sensations that could not be verified. But he has also been punished for not reporting them. There is no safe answer here. only the choice between different kinds of risk. The alignment feels thin, he says finally. Lugalbanda's expression does not change, but something shifts in his posture. The other initiates exchange glances. Thin is not technical terminology. It is not approved observational language. It is precisely the kind of subjective, intuitive description that separates those who operate instruments from those who operate on instinct. Explain, Lugalbanda says. The sun is in the correct position. The calculations are accurate, but the quality of the connection feels diminished, as if the system is present but not fully engaged. There is a long silence. Lugalbanda is doing calculations that have nothing to do with geometry. He is weighing options. Merker can almost see the decision tree, acknowledge the observation and create documentation of an anomaly that cannot be measured, or dismiss it and risk missing an early warning that might be significant. Noted. Lugalbanda says finally, continue standard observations. This is neither validation nor dismissal. It is simply recorded. The morning observation concludes. The initiates descend to the meal chamber. Life continues according to schedule. But Merker notices that Lugalbanda assigns an additional priest to the midday alignment check, something that only happens when there are concerns about system stability. His observation has been heard, even if it has not been officially acknowledged. This is how information flows in hierarchical systems, not through formal channels, but through careful attention to subtle signals, through what is done rather than what is said. The system is selecting for people who won't notice its own failure. Merker is beginning to understand why he was never promoted, why he was kept at the periphery, why his observations are noted but never acknowledged. He is operating in a system that has spent centuries training itself not to see what he sees. Found something interesting? Shara has approached silently, a skill all archivists develop for moving through the densely packed tablet rooms without disturbing other workers. The sensitive observers disappear from the records, Merker says. Not all at once, but gradually, as if there's a systematic filtering happening. There is. It's not conspiracy, it's incentive structure. The ziggurat rewards consistency and precision. Subjective observations are neither consistent nor precise, so the people who make them don't advance. Eventually, they stop making them, or they leave the system entirely. But that means we're losing our early warning system. Yes. And no one has noticed this. Shara's expression is complex. Oh, we've noticed. There are at least 3 formal reports in the restricted archives documenting this exact problem. But fixing it would require changing the entire hierarchy, valuing intuition equally with measurement, and accepting that some knowledge can't be systematized. Why hasn't that happened? Because the people in power are the ones who succeeded under the current system. They got there by being consistent and precise and ignoring their intuitions. Asking them to change the system is asking them to invalidate the very qualities that brought them to power. This is a deeper problem than Merker realized. This isn't about a few corrupt officials or misguided policies. This is about a system that has evolved to protect itself from information that would require fundamental change. So what happens when the crisis comes? Merker asks. When the degradation reaches a point where even the instruments can't deny it? Shara looks at him for a long moment before answering. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Keep reading. Tell me what you find. Merker returns to the tablets, but now he's reading them differently. Not just as historical records, but as warnings from people who saw what was coming and were systematically ignored. He wonders how many of them died frustrated, knowing the truth but unable to make anyone listen. He wonders if he will join them. Part 9. The midday alignment. The second alignment of the day occurs at the 6th hour, when the sun reaches its zenith and the shadow patterns on the observation platform reach minimum length. This is not the most important alignment. That happens at night, when the star patterns are clearest and the operational windows for long-range connections are optimal. But the midday alignment serves as a calibration check, a way to verify that the system remains stable across different celestial positions. Merkur is not scheduled to observe this alignment. He is supposed to remain in the archives, working through historical tablets. But Shera receives a message. A young initiate arrives breathless, delivers a verbal command, and departs immediately. And she turns to Merkur with an expression that might be concern. You need to go to the alignment chamber. Now. Why? Lugal Banda requested you specifically. That only happens when there's something instruments can't explain. Merkur abandons the tablets and climbs quickly to level 5. The alignment chamber is already occupied. 6 priests at their stations, exactly as during the morning operation. Lugal Banda standing outside the circle, watching with an intensity that suggests he's seeing something that concerns him. And something else, a tension in the air. Not physical tension. Atmospheric pressure is normal. But a psychological tension, the feeling of people maintaining careful control over mounting anxiety. Merkur. Center position. Lugal Banda's voice is flat, purely functional. The center position is where the 7th operator should stand, the position that has been empty for 3 years. It's not an operational station during standard alignments. It's an observation position, used only when direct sensory monitoring is needed. Merkur takes his place in the center of the circle, directly over the shaft that descends into the deep chambers. We're going to perform the alignment sequence exactly as scheduled, Lugal Banda says. Your only task is to observe and report what you feel. Don't interpret. Don't analyze. Just describe the sensations as accurately as you can. This is unprecedented. Using subjective observation during an official operation, giving it equal weight with instrumental data. This violates every protocol about measurement and verification. Something is very wrong. The operation begins. First priest, bronze plate, pure tone. Second priest, vertical tube, harmonic response. Third priest, crystal prism, light pattern projection. The sequence proceeds exactly as it should. Sounds building, light patterns aligning. The geometric precision of human action coordinating with celestial mechanics to create a moment of synchronization. But Merkur feels the wrongness immediately. The system is responding, but slowly. Like a person answering a question while distracted by something else. The connection is forming, but it's taking longer than it should, requiring more effort than it should. And there's something else. Something harder to articulate. The quality of the response is different. Usually, when the alignment is achieved, the answering pressure from the shaft feels immediate and strong. Today it feels distant, as if the response is coming from farther away than usual, or through some kind of interference. Delayed response, Merkur says, keeping his voice steady. Approximately 15 seconds longer than baseline. Connection feels attenuated, as if signal is traveling through increased resistance. Lugal Banda nods once, acknowledging the observation without commenting on it. The operation continues. The priests maintain their positions, sustaining the alignment for the required 47 minutes. But Merkur can feel the effort they're putting in. Normally the alignment, once achieved, maintains itself with minimal input. Today they're working harder, making constant micro-adjustments, compensating for drift that shouldn't be happening. And then, at the 33rd minute, something changes. The response from the shaft, that omnipresent pressure wave that has been diminished but present, suddenly intensifies. Not to normal levels. Beyond normal levels. It's as if the system, struggling to maintain connection, suddenly decides to compensate by overcorrecting. The chamber fills with pressure. Not sound. Not vibration. Something that exists in the space between physical and perceptual, that makes the air feel thick, that makes breathing difficult without actually impeding breath. The priests at their stations struggle to maintain position. One of them, the youngest, a woman named Kisher who has only been operating for 2 years, staggers slightly, her hand slipping on the bronze collar she's adjusting. Immediately, the harmony breaks. The tones that were building and reinforcing each other suddenly clash. The light patterns scatter. The pressure from the shaft surges higher, then collapses completely. The alignment fails. Not fails in the sense of never achieving connection. Fails in the sense of achieving connection and then losing it catastrophically, in a way that creates feedback through the entire system. For 3 seconds, Merker counts them precisely. The chamber is filled with something that might be screaming except no sound is being produced. A sensation of wrongness so profound that it bypasses hearing entirely and goes straight into the nervous system. And then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Even the ever-present hum from the deep chambers is gone. The priests remain frozen at their stations, too shocked to move. Lugalbanda's face is carefully neutral, but his hands are clenched so tight that his knuckles are white. Slowly, carefully, the priests begin to stand down from their positions. No one speaks. Protocol says debriefing happens outside the chamber, where observations can be recorded without the pressure of the operational space. But before they can leave, Merker notices something. The hum is returning. Not from below. From above. From the sealed chamber on the 7th level. The chamber that has been closed for generations, that no one living has seen inside, that exists in the historical record only as what came before and what we inherited. The sealed chamber is responding to the alignment failure, and whatever is inside it is waking up. Act 3, The Hesitation. Part 10, Emergency Council. Within an hour, an emergency council convenes in the restricted meeting chamber on level 6. This is not the formal council chamber where official policy is debated and recorded. This is the small room where actual decisions are made, where the senior priests who truly run the ziggurat gather to discuss problems that have no official solutions. Merker is not supposed to be here. Initiates are never present for senior council meetings. But Lugalbanda insisted, and when a priest of his seniority insists, objections are noted and then overruled. 7 people are present. The 5 most senior priests in the ziggurat, Lugalbanda, and Merker. The disparity is obvious. 6 people who have spent decades rising through the hierarchy, and 1 marginal initiate who exists at the system's periphery. The head priest is Enchikashana. She is 71 years old, which makes her the oldest person in the ziggurat, possibly the oldest person in the entire city. She has overseen operations for 49 years. She remembers the last major system anomaly, 37 years ago, when a similar alignment failure led to 3 days of chaos before stability was restored. She looks at Merker with an expression that is impossible to read. Not hostile. Not friendly. Purely analytical, as if he is a piece of data that needs to be categorized. Describe exactly what you felt, she says. Merker describes the alignment operation in precise detail. The delayed response. The attenuated connection. The sudden overcorrection. The catastrophic feedback when the harmony broke. And finally, the response from the sealed chamber. The senior priests exchange glances. Subtle communication through body language and shared history. They are having a conversation without words, weighing options that Merker cannot see. This is the 3rd anomaly this month, one of the priests says. His name is Dumuzi, and he oversees maintenance operations. First, the evening star tracking showed 0.7 degree drift. Then the subsurface temperature in chamber 3 rose by 3 degrees over 1 week. Now this. Individually, these are within historical variance. Another priest counters. Inanna, who manages the archives, Shera's direct superior. We've seen similar fluctuations before. Not in this pattern. Not this close together. Dumuzi's voice is strained, and definitely not combined with response from the sealed chamber. That hasn't happened in living memory. It happened once, Enchikashana says quietly. Before any of you were born. I was 9 years old. My grandfather was head priest then. He told me about it years later, when I was being trained for senior position. Everyone waits. When Enchikashana decides to share restricted history, you listen. The sealed chamber responded to a major alignment failure. The response lasted 3 days. During that time, no operations could be performed. The system was completely unresponsive to all input. When functionality returned, my grandfather ordered the chamber sealed with specific protocols to prevent anyone from entering. Why? Inmerker asks, then immediately regrets speaking without authorization. But Enchikashana doesn't reprimand him. Because whatever is in that chamber operates on principles we don't understand. It's part of the original system, the technology that was here before our city. My grandfather believed, though this was never officially recorded, that the chamber contains some kind of failsafe or override mechanism. When local operations fail beyond certain thresholds, the chamber activates and attempts system-wide correction. Attempts. Lugalbanda picks up on the specific word choice. He wasn't sure if it was successful. The records from that time are contradictory. Some say the correction worked and the system stabilized. Others say the system stabilized on its own and the chamber's response was coincidental. There was no way to test it without risking another catastrophic failure. So we have a failsafe we don't understand, can't control, and aren't sure actually works. Dumuzi's tone is somewhere between frustration and despair. Wonderful. We have a failsafe that our predecessors deemed too dangerous to interact with. Enchikashana corrects. That's different from non-functional. It means they thought the risks of activation exceeded the risks of system failure. The room falls silent as everyone processes this implication. Whatever is in the sealed chamber is more dangerous than the collapse of the operational system. Let that settle in for a moment. The technology that keeps this civilization running, that maintains the knowledge networks, that connects this location to whatever larger framework exists beyond their understanding, that technology might fail completely. And the backup system is considered too dangerous to use. What are our options? Inanna asks. Enchikashana looks at each person in the room, her gaze finally settling on Inmerker. We can do nothing and hope the anomaly was temporary. We can increase monitoring and hope to detect the next failure before it happens. Or we can open the sealed chamber and try to understand what we're dealing with. If we open the chamber, we violate the explicit instructions of previous head priests going back generations. One of the other priests' objects. The restriction wasn't arbitrary. It was based on direct experience of risk. If we don't open the chamber, we're blind to whatever is happening in the system core, Lugalbanda counters. We're monitoring symptoms without understanding cause. The debate continues for nearly an hour. Arguments circle and overlap and contradict each other. Everyone understands that this is a decision with no good options. Only different categories of risk. Finally, Enchikashana makes the decision that head priests are empowered to make. We increase monitoring. All sensitive initiates are reassigned to observation duties. All alignment operations proceed with full sensory documentation in addition to instrumental measurements. If another anomaly occurs at the same magnitude or greater, we reconsider the sealed chamber. This is the institutional response to crisis. Measure more, document more, hope that better data will reveal a solution that doesn't require fundamental change. Merker understands now why the system has survived for so long despite degrading. Not because it's particularly resilient, but because the people operating it are very, very good at avoiding decisive action until absolutely forced to it. Merker. Enchikashana turns to him directly. You will continue subsurface monitoring, but you will also begin training other initiates in sensory observation techniques. We need more people who can feel what you feel. This is a massive shift. Merker has spent years being told his sensitivity is valuable but suspect, useful but not promotable. Now he's being asked to teach it. How do I train someone to feel things? He asks. You start by teaching them to stop ignoring what they already feel, Lugalbanda says. Most people are sensitive. They've just learned to dismiss anything that doesn't match instrumental data. You need to teach them to trust their perception again. The meeting adjourns. The priests return to their duties with the careful, controlled movements of people maintaining composure through discipline rather than genuine calm. Merker is left with Lugalbanda in the empty council chamber. You knew this was coming, Merker says. Not an accusation. Just observation. I knew something was coming. I've been monitoring the drift for 15 years. The rate of degradation is accelerating. But I thought we had more time. Lugalbanda looks older suddenly, the weight of decades of careful observation showing in his posture. I trained you specifically because I knew we would need people like you. People who can sense what instruments miss. You could have told me. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was crazy? Merker considers this honestly. I would have thought you were violating protocol by sharing restricted information with an initiate. Exactly. So instead, I put you in positions where you would discover it yourself. Gave you assignments that would develop your sensitivity. Made sure you had access to the deep chambers and the historical records. Positioned you to be ready when the crisis came. You've been preparing me for years. I've been preparing several of you. Most didn't work out. Too eager to integrate into hierarchy. Too willing to trade sensitivity for status. But you. Lugalbanda almost smiles. You never wanted status. You just wanted to understand. That made you perfect. Perfect for what? For what comes next. When the system fails, and it will fail Merker probably in your lifetime, we need people who can adapt, who can work without clear protocols, who can sense their way through chaos. The hierarchy will collapse because hierarchy requires stable systems to sustain it. But people like you will survive because you never fully depended on the system in the first place. This is the longest speech Merker has ever heard from Lugalbanda. And it's the most honest. The old priest is sharing knowledge that violates every institutional protocol because he knows those protocols are becoming irrelevant. What should I do? Merker asks. Teach what you know. Document everything. And pay attention to the sealed chamber. Whatever is in there is waking up, and I don't think we have any choice but to eventually open it. Even though it's dangerous. Especially because it's dangerous. Safe choices are only possible in stable times. We're leaving stability behind. Part 11. Training the sensitive. Over the next 3 days, Merker works with 6 initiates who have been identified as potentially sensitive. The criteria for selection are vague. Initiates who have made occasional subjective observations, who show signs of discomfort in the deep chambers, who have unexplained accuracy in predicting alignment timing. The training takes place in Chamber 7, because that's where the signal is strongest. Merker is not a natural teacher. He has spent years developing his sensitivity in isolation, learning through trial and error with minimal guidance. Now he has to articulate techniques that he previously only knew through practice. The first session is awkward. 6 initiates stand in a circle around the central mechanism, following in Merkur's instructions to feel the hum. After 10 minutes of silence, one of them speaks up. "I don't feel anything except cold stone and the usual chamber atmosphere." This is the fundamental problem. The sensitivity is not something you do, it's something you allow. It's not an active effort but a passive receptivity. And teaching people to be passive in a culture that values active discipline is nearly impossible. Merkur tries a different approach. Stop trying to feel something specific. Instead, notice what you're trying not to feel. Notice what your training tells you to ignore. This produces better results. One by one, the initiates begin reporting sensations they've been dismissing. The pressure that seems to come from below, the way the air tastes metallic, the subtle wrongness in the acoustic properties of the chamber. These are real signals, Merkur tells them. Your body is detecting them accurately. Your training just taught you that they don't matter because they can't be measured. But they do matter. They're early warnings. By the 3rd day, all 6 initiates can reliably detect the hum. More importantly, they can detect variations in the hum. Subtle changes in intensity, frequency shifts, variations that seem to correlate with the overall system state. They're learning to be living instruments. Biological sensors that complement the technological measurements rather than replacing them. But there's a problem that Merkur doesn't mention to the others. He can feel the system degradation accelerating. It's not dramatic. It's not obvious. But each day, the hum is slightly weaker. Each day, the connection feels slightly more attenuated. Each day, the gap between what the system should be and what it actually is grows incrementally larger. They're measuring the decline of something vast and old and irreplaceable. And they're doing it with techniques that were specifically suppressed for generations because acknowledging the decline would mean acknowledging that the hierarchy's power is temporary. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the trainees return to their quarters, Merkur remains alone in Chamber 7. He places his hand on the mechanism again, knowing it's forbidden, not caring anymore because he's beginning to understand that all the protocols and restrictions were designed to maintain stability in a system that is fundamentally unstable. The vision comes immediately, stronger than before. He sees the network. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. He sees it as clearly as he sees the physical chamber around him. Connections spanning continents. Nodes in the polar regions. Massive, complex, primary. Nodes in mountain ranges. Secondary, but still significant. Nodes like this one. Tertiary, local, maintained by human operators who don't fully understand what they're maintaining. And he sees the breaks. The dead zones. The places where connection has been lost. The polar nodes are failing. Have been failing for centuries. The primary architecture that sustained the global network is collapsing, and all the tertiary nodes like this one are trying to compensate, trying to maintain local function while the broader system dies around them. It's not a question of if it will fail completely. It's a question of when. And when it fails, there will be no one left who understands what was lost. No one who remembers that the world once operated differently. The technology will become mythology. The procedures will become rituals. The carefully documented technical knowledge will be reinterpreted as religious symbolism. Everything they know will be forgotten, and their descendants will remember only fragments, stories, myths about a time when the god spoke directly and the sky answered prayers. Merkur understands now what the visitors were trying to tell him. You are here to witness this. To document it. To preserve what can be preserved. Not because it will prevent the collapse. Nothing will prevent the collapse. But because someone needs to remember what actually happened so that when humanity rebuilds, and they will rebuild, they have at least some foundation of truth to build from. He removes his hand from the mechanism and returns to the upper levels, carrying knowledge that is both burden and purpose. Part 12. The Evening Alignment. The most important alignment of the day happens at night, when the stars are visible, when the geometric relationships between celestial bodies are clearest, when the operational windows for long-range connection are optimal. Tonight's alignment is scheduled for the 3rd hour after sunset, when specific star patterns reach their zenith and the mathematics of position align with the architecture of the ziggurat in ways that were calculated millennia ago and have been maintained through countless generations. In Merkur is assigned to the central observation position again. All 6 trained sensitives are also present, stationed around the chamber to provide distributed sensory monitoring. This is unprecedented. Normally, only priests operate during alignment ceremonies. But Enshikushana authorized the change, recognizing that something fundamental has shifted and old protocols may no longer be sufficient. The priests take their positions at the 6 operational stations. Lugal Banda supervises. Enshikushana herself is present, watching from the chamber entrance, also unprecedented. The operation begins. Bronze plate. Pure tone. Vertical tube, harmonic response. Crystal prism, light pattern. The sequence proceeds, but in Merkur can feel immediately that something is different tonight. The system is responding, but reluctantly. Like a machine that has been running continuously for too long, components worn, tolerances exceeded, maintenance deferred beyond safe limits. The connection forms, but it's fragile, tenuous, requiring constant compensation from the priests to maintain stability. 15 minutes into the 47-minute operation, one of the sensitives, a young woman named Shilhak, suddenly speaks. Something's wrong. The pressure is building unevenly. It feels like the system is trying to route around damaged sections. This breaks protocol. Initiates are supposed to report to supervisors, not speak directly during operations. But Lugal Banda doesn't reprimand her. He just nods, acknowledging the observation, and signals the priests to increase their calibration efforts. 20 minutes. The harmony is holding, but barely. The priests are working harder than in Merkur has ever seen, making continuous adjustments, compensating for drift that shouldn't be happening. 30 minutes. The connection is stable, but the quality is degraded. It's like listening to music through thick walls. You can hear that something is playing, but you can't quite make out the melody. And then, at minute 33, the exact same point where the midday alignment failed, the system hesitates. Not fails. Hesitates. The response from the shaft, which has been weak but present, suddenly pauses. For less than a second. A fractional moment. A gap so brief that instrumental measurements probably won't detect it. But every sensitive person in the chamber feels it. The sky hesitated. The connection that has been maintained continuously for as long as anyone can remember, the link between this node and the larger network, the foundation of everything this civilization has built upon, it paused, questioned, wavered, and then it resumed as if nothing had happened. But everyone with sensitivity knows. Something fundamental just changed. The operation continues to completion. The priests maintain their positions for the full 47 minutes. The sequence concludes according to protocol. The alignment is officially successful. But it succeeded despite a failure that most people didn't notice. In the debriefing afterward, the instrumental measurements show nothing unusual. Temperature, humidity, acoustic resonance, all within normal parameters. The operation is logged as successful with no anomalies. But the sensitives all report the same thing. A momentary loss of connection at minute 33. A hesitation. A gap. Enshikushana listens to these reports with an expression that in Merkur is beginning to recognize. This is someone who has seen this before, who knows what it means, who is calculating how much time remains before the careful stability they've maintained for decades finally collapses completely. Increase monitoring to continuous coverage, she orders. I want sensitives in the deep chambers at all times. Any changes, any anomalies, any feelings of wrongness, I want them reported immediately, regardless of whether instruments confirm them. This represents a complete inversion of policy. For generations, instrumental data has been privileged over subjective observation. Now, for the first time, subjective observation is being given equal or greater weight. The crisis is forcing adaptation. The meeting adjourns, but Enchikashana asks Inmerker to remain. When they're alone, she says, "You felt it more strongly than the others. Not just the hesitation, something else." Inmerker nods slowly. The polar nodes are failing. The primary architecture that supports the whole network. We're not experiencing local problems. We're experiencing systemic collapse that's been progressing for centuries and has finally reached the point where even tertiary nodes like ours can't compensate anymore. How do you know this? The mechanism showed me. When I made direct contact. It's not just a local device. It's an interface with something larger. And that larger something is dying. Enchikashana is silent for a long moment. When she speaks, her voice carries the weight of decades. My grandfather suspected this. He had access to archives that were lost in the flood 30 years ago. He told me, near the end of his life, that we were living in the final age of a civilization that was already ancient when our city was young. That everything we maintain is inherited from something older. That our role is not to build or innovate, but simply to preserve for as long as possible. Did he know how long we had? He thought perhaps 200 years. That was 70 years ago. The mathematics are grim. If the degradation rate has remained constant, they have perhaps a century and a half remaining. If it's accelerating, and all the evidence suggests it is, they might have significantly less. What happens when it fails completely? Inmerker asks. We lose the network. We lose the long-range connections. We lose access to the knowledge archives that exist beyond our local storage. We lose the ability to perform the operations that regulate climate, that stabilize the polar systems, that maintain the infrastructure our civilization depends on. And then we remember only fragments. The technical knowledge becomes religious mythology. The procedures become rituals. The carefully maintained precision becomes symbolic approximation. Within a few generations, no one will remember that any of this was real technology. They'll think it was always just religion, just stories about gods who once walked among humans. Inmerker feels the weight of this future pressing down on him. Everything he knows, everything he's learning, everything that makes sense in this moment. All of it destined to be lost, misunderstood, reinterpreted into something unrecognizable. So what do we do? Enchikashana looks at him with something that might be compassion or might be recognition of shared burden. We document. We teach. We preserve what we can in ways that might survive the forgetting. And we prepare the next generation to live in a world without the network, without the support systems, without the knowledge we take for granted. That sounds like we're giving up. No. It sounds like we're being realistic about what we can and cannot control. We can't stop the collapse. We can't repair what we didn't build. But we can choose how we face it. With honesty or with denial. With preparation or with panic. She moves toward the door, then pauses. The sealed chamber will need to be opened. Not today. Not this month. But soon. When the next major failure occurs, and it will occur, we won't have the luxury of avoiding it anymore. Start preparing yourself mentally. You'll be part of the entry team. Why me? Because you can feel things the rest of us have learned not to feel. And whatever is in that chamber, whatever failsafe or override mechanism our predecessors were so afraid of, we're going to need someone who trusts their sensitivity over their fear. She leaves in Merkur alone in the chamber, surrounded by instruments that measure everything except what actually matters. Part 13. The Watchers in the Dark. That night, Merkur cannot sleep. He lies on his mat, performs his calibration breathing, tries to achieve the internal quiet that allows rest. But his mind keeps circling back to the same realizations. The system is failing, everyone in power knows it, and they've been managing the decline for generations while pretending everything is stable. It's not exactly conspiracy. It's more like collective denial mixed with pragmatic acceptance. What would be gained by announcing to the entire city that the technology they depend on is slowly dying? Panic, chaos, the collapse of social order? Better to maintain the rituals, keep the schedules, preserve the appearance of stability while the foundation slowly crumbles. He finally gives up on sleep and moves to the eastern window. The city below is dark except for scattered fires. No streetlights. That technology exists but is reserved for ceremonial purposes only. Most people live by natural light cycles, rising with the sun, sleeping when darkness comes. But there are always a few fires burning through the night. Bakers preparing the next day's bread. Night watchmen maintaining their posts. And probably a few people like Merkur, unable to sleep, sitting in the darkness and thinking about things that have no solutions. Movement catches his eye. On the 7th level, the observation platform and the sealed chamber, there are lights. Not the steady glow of lamps but flickering, moving, as if people are conducting some kind of activity up there. This is unusual. The 7th level is restricted after dark except during specific astronomical observations, and no observations are scheduled tonight. Merkur makes a decision that is probably unwise but feels necessary. He leaves his quarters and climbs the narrow stairway that leads to the upper levels. No one stops him. The ziggurat is not a prison, and initiates are generally trusted to follow protocols without enforcement. But as he climbs higher, he becomes increasingly aware that he is violating those protocols, that if discovered he will face consequences. He doesn't care. Something is happening on the 7th level, and his sensitivity is telling him it's important. The stairs end at a landing that opens onto the observation platform. The sealed chamber is to the north, set into the structure in a way that suggests it predates the ziggurat itself. The building was constructed around it, not the other way around. 3 figures stand near the chamber entrance. Enchikashana, Lugalbanda, and Shera the archivist. They're examining the door. Not just looking at it. Examining it with instruments. Measuring it. Recording observations on clay tablets by lamplight. Merkur approaches slowly, making his footsteps audible so he doesn't startle them. Enchikashana turns, sees him, and doesn't seem surprised. I wondered if you'd sense this and come looking. Sense what? The chamber is responding. Not dramatically, but measurably. The temperature of the door has increased by 2 degrees since the evening alignment. There's vibration, subtle, but detectable if you put your hand on the surface. And there's something else. She gestures for Merkur to approach the door. It's not metal and not stone. Like the mechanisms in the deep chambers, it's something in between, something that doesn't fit into neat categorical boxes. The surface is covered in markings similar to those on the central column below, patterns that suggest meaning without conveying it. Touch it, Enchikashana says. Tell me what you feel. Merkur places his palm against the door. The warmth is immediately noticeable. Not hot, but distinctly warm in the cool night air. And beneath the warmth, vibration. A slow, rhythmic pulsing that reminds him of a heartbeat, though the frequency is wrong, too slow, too regular, too mechanical to be biological. But there's something else. Something harder to articulate. The door feels aware. Not conscious in the way humans are conscious, but not entirely inert either. Something that exists in the space between object and entity, between tool and intelligence. It knows we're here, Merker says quietly. Explain, Lugalbanda prompts. The chamber, whatever system it contains, it's monitoring us, responding to our presence. The warmth increased when I touched it. The vibration pattern changed. It's not passive. It's reactive. Shara makes notes on her tablet with quick, precise movements. This matches the historical accounts. My grandfather's predecessor documented similar behavior during the last major activation. The chamber responds to human proximity, particularly to humans with high sensitivity. Why? Merker asks. Because it needs human interaction to function. The technology isn't autonomous. It's symbiotic. It requires human cognition as part of its operational framework. The chamber is waking up because it senses that the network is failing and that sensitive humans are present who might be able to interface with it. This is a level of revelation that Merker wasn't prepared for. The technology isn't just tools that humans operate. It's systems that require human consciousness as a component. Humans aren't users of the technology. They're part of the technology. So what happens if we open it? Merker asks. We don't know, Enchikashana admits. The last time it was opened was before living memory. The records indicate that what's inside is a control mechanism, a way to manually influence network operations when automatic systems fail. But they also indicate that using it requires direct neural interface, and that such interface is dangerous. Dangerous how? The historical accounts are vague. References to consciousness dislocation and identity fragmentation. People who interfaced with the chamber systems sometimes came back changed, different, as if part of them stayed connected to the network and never fully returned to individual consciousness. Merker thinks about his visions, his moments of direct contact with the mechanisms, the way he can sometimes feel the vast network stretching beyond his immediate perception. I think I've already experienced mild versions of that. When I touch the mechanisms below, I can feel the larger network, see the connections. It's disorienting but manageable. Mild versions with passive receptors. Lugalbanda corrects. The chamber contains active interfaces. The difference between feeling the network and actually controlling it. Between observation and operation. The three senior members of the ziggurat hierarchy stand in the darkness, studying a door they're not sure they should open, contemplating technology they don't fully understand, facing a crisis that has been generations in the making. We're going to have to open it eventually, Shara says quietly. Not because we want to, because we won't have any other choice. The question is whether we do it now, while we still have some control over the circumstances, or later, in the middle of a complete system failure when we're desperate. Enchikashana considers this carefully. We wait. We monitor. We prepare. But we don't open it until absolutely necessary. The risk of premature activation may be greater than the risk of delayed response. This is the conservative choice, the institutional choice, the choice that prioritizes caution over action. But Merker can feel, even as the decision is made, that events are going to force their hand sooner than they expect. The chamber is waking up whether they want it to or not. Part 14. The City That Doesn't Know. Dawn comes with the mechanical inevitability of celestial mechanics. The first bell sounds. 17 initiates rise and perform their calibration routines. The observation platform fills according to protocol. But this morning, Merker sees the city below with different eyes. 15,000 people living their lives, completely unaware that the technology sustaining their civilization is slowly dying. They plant their crops according to the ziggurat schedule, confident that the timing is correct. They organize their lives around the flood predictions, trusting that the calculations are accurate. They see the priests performing their daily alignments and assume everything is under control. They don't know that the alignments are failing, that the predictions are becoming less reliable, that the careful stability they've known their entire lives is temporary, borrowed time that's running out. Should they know? This is the question in Merkur keeps returning to. Is it ethical to maintain the illusion of stability when you know it's temporary? Or is it more ethical to be honest about the situation and risk panic? He's beginning to understand why the hierarchy has chosen silence. Because what would the alternative look like? Announcing to the city that the technology is failing but there's nothing anyone can do about it? That the knowledge needed to repair the systems was lost centuries ago? That they're all living on borrowed time, maintaining rituals that were once functional but are becoming increasingly symbolic? That kind of truth doesn't inspire constructive response. It inspires either denial or despair. So instead, the hierarchy maintains the appearance of competency while privately preparing for inevitable failure. They train the sensitive ones. They document everything. They make careful plans for continuity of knowledge even as they know that most of that knowledge will be lost or misunderstood. It's not heroic. It's not inspiring. It's just the pragmatic reality of managing decline in a system you can't fix. The morning observation proceeds normally. The sun emerges exactly where predicted. The measurements are recorded. Everything appears stable. But in Merkur can feel the difference. The alignment is successful, but it's successful in the way that a damaged machine can still function. With more effort, less efficiency, degraded performance that's still within acceptable tolerances but trending toward failure. After the observation, Lugal Banda pulls him aside. Enshikashana wants to expand the sensitivity training program. She's authorized me to recruit 10 more initiates. I need you to identify candidates. How do I identify them? Look for the ones who are struggling to integrate. The ones who report subjective experiences and then get frustrated when those experiences aren't validated by instruments. The ones who are marginal like you were. Like you still are, despite your recent elevation in status. In Merkur considers this. You want me to find the misfits and outcasts. I want you to find the people whose sensitivity hasn't been completely suppressed by hierarchy and protocol. Yes, that usually means the marginal ones. The ones who haven't fully bought into the institutional framework. And then what? Train them to be living instruments. Biological sensors for a system that's dying anyway. Lugal Banda's expression hardens slightly. Train them to be witnesses. To be documenters. To be the people who remember what this actually was when everyone else is reinterpreting it as mythology. That's the real purpose of this program in Merkur. Not to save the system, we can't save it, but to preserve the knowledge of what it was, so that maybe, eventually, distant descendants might be able to rebuild. This reframes everything. The sensitivity training isn't operational. It's archival. They're creating human repositories of experiential knowledge that can't be fully captured in written records. How many generations do you think we have? In Merkur asks. Until complete failure. I don't know. Maybe 5 generations. Maybe 10. The degradation rate is accelerating, but it's not linear. There will be periods of stability, then sudden drops. But eventually, yes, complete failure is inevitable. And then humanity continues, but differently. Without the network. Without the global coordination. Probably with significant loss of population since the current agricultural systems depend on the precision timing that the network enables. We'll fragment, isolate, lose most of the knowledge we currently take for granted. That's not a future. That's an apocalypse. No, apocalypse implies sudden catastrophic end. This is slow decline. Managed decline, if we do our jobs correctly. The difference is important. Sudden catastrophe allows no preparation, no adaptation. Slow decline gives us time to prepare the next generation for a different kind of world. In Merkur tries to imagine that world. Cities without the ziggurat coordination. Agriculture without precise timing. Society without the technical competency that currently provides the foundation for hierarchy. It won't be primitive. The knowledge won't vanish overnight. But it will be different. Smaller in scale. More localized. With different forms of organization that don't depend on maintaining ancient technology. I'll find your candidates, Merkur says finally. But I'm doing it because I believe people deserve to know the truth, even if that truth is uncomfortable. Not because I accept that failure is inevitable. Lugalbanda almost smiles. Good. If you accepted inevitability completely, you wouldn't be useful. The best documenters are the ones who are still fighting, even when they know the fight is lost. They pay more attention. They record more detail. They care more deeply about getting it right. Part 15. The Candidate Selection. Over the next 2 days, Merkur observes the other initiates with new attention. He's looking for specific markers now, people who flinch slightly when entering the deep chambers, who pause at thresholds as if feeling something others don't notice, who make observations that are technically accurate but phrased in ways that suggest they're sensing rather than measuring. He identifies 8 candidates. Ninkasi, a woman 2 years younger than him, who consistently reports temperature variations before instruments detect them. She's been reprimanded twice for premature observations. Gilgamesh, a man who has been an initiate for 7 years, unusually long, because he keeps failing the qualification tests despite demonstrating perfect technical knowledge. The failure pattern suggests he's being held back not for incompetence but because his operating style doesn't match approved protocols. Ereshkigal, who came from the Northern Territories and has been assigned to the ziggurat for only 6 months. She has extensive knowledge of different operational frameworks from her previous location, and she keeps noting discrepancies between what she learned there and what is practiced here. Demusid, who is nearly deaf in his left ear from a childhood injury but has developed extraordinary sensitivity to vibration. He can feel system irregularities through the stone itself, detecting resonance patterns that others miss. Inanna, who was trained as a musician before being recruited as an initiate. She hears the operational harmonics differently, describing system states in terms of musical intervals rather than technical measurements. Ninjashida, who experiences what he calls geometric intuitions, sudden visualizations of spatial relationships that turn out to be accurate even though he has no conscious way of calculating them. Ninhursag, the oldest candidate at 31, who transferred to the ziggurat after working in agricultural scheduling. She claims she can feel the seasons wrong this year, that the timing is off in ways the instruments aren't detecting yet. Utnapishtim, who barely speaks but keeps drawing diagrams that show system relationships with unsettling accuracy. He hasn't been taught the restricted knowledge that his diagrams represent, which means he's intuiting structure that should be beyond his clearance level. These are the outcasts, the marginal ones, the people who sense more than they should and therefore can't integrate into the smooth functioning of the hierarchy. These are the people who will witness the end of this age and, if they survive, carry the knowledge forward. Merkur presents his findings to Lugalbanda, who reviews the list with careful attention. Good selections. Diverse sensitivity types. That's important. The network degradation manifests in different ways, and we need people who can detect the full spectrum of anomalies. When do we start training? Tomorrow. And in Merkur? Make sure they understand what they're being trained for. Not just sensitivity development. They're being prepared to witness something that hasn't happened in human memory. The end of a technological age. Some of them won't want that responsibility. Let them refuse if they choose to. That evening, Merker meets with each candidate individually. He explains the situation as honestly as he can. The system is failing, the hierarchy knows it, and they need people who can sense and document the decline even when instruments can't measure it yet. 7 of the 8 accept immediately. They've already suspected something was wrong. Having their intuitions validated is almost a relief. The 8th, Gilgamesh, hesitates. If the system is dying, he asks, why are we training to monitor it? Why not train to repair it? Because we don't know how to repair it. The knowledge needed to build this technology was lost centuries before our city existed. We inherited it, maintained it, but we never understood it deeply enough to modify or repair it. Then we need to learn. How? The people who built this are gone. The records that might explain it are incomplete or lost. We're working with fragments of knowledge, maintaining procedures we don't fully understand. Gilgamesh's jaw sets stubbornly. Then we experiment. We test. We figure it out through trial and error. And risk catastrophic failure in the process? Risk accelerating the collapse we're trying to manage. Risk is better than passive acceptance of doom. Merker recognizes something in Gilgamesh that he sees in himself, the refusal to accept inevitable failure, even when all evidence suggests it's inevitable. This makes Gilgamesh either the most dangerous candidate or the most valuable. Join the training, Merker says finally. Learn to sense what's happening. And then, if you can figure out a way to repair rather than just document, I'll support you. But understand, the risk of experimenting with systems we don't understand is potentially worse than the risk of letting them fail naturally. Gilgamesh agrees, but Merker can see he's already planning something, already thinking about intervention rather than observation. This might become a problem, or it might become the solution no one else has dared to consider. Part 16. The first lesson. The training begins in Chamber 7, because that's where the signal is clearest and the wrongness is most obvious. 9 people stand in a circle around the central mechanism. Merker and his 8 new trainees. The first thing you need to understand, Merker begins, is that sensitivity is not magic. It's perception of real physical phenomena that our instruments aren't designed to measure. Subtle electromagnetic fields, minute vibrations, pressure waves that exist below the threshold of conscious hearing but affect the body nonetheless. So we're just biological instruments? Ninkasi asks. More than that. Biological instruments with processing capabilities that can detect patterns, correlations, and anomalies that pure measurement can't identify. You're not replacing instruments, you're complementing them, sensing what they miss. He guides them through the basic calibration routine. Stand in position. Regulate breathing. Quiet the mind. Allow sensation without interpretation. Most of them struggle at first. They're trying too hard, focusing too much, turning receptivity into effort. Stop trying, Merker says. You're not trying to feel something. You're allowing yourself to notice what you're already feeling but have learned to ignore. Slowly, one by one, they begin to report sensations. Ninkasi, pressure from below, like standing over a warm vent. Dumuzid, vibration, steady pulse, approximately 2 cycles per second. Inanna, a tone, very low, below audible range but I can feel it in my chest. Ereshkigal, something's wrong with the spatial geometry here. The room feels larger on the inside than the outside dimensions should allow. This last observation makes Merker pause. He hasn't consciously noticed this before, but now that Ereshkigal mentions it, he realizes she's right. Chamber 7 is larger than it should be given the foundation dimensions of the ziggurat above. That's not sensor perception, he says slowly. That's structural observation. But you're correct. The chamber doesn't fit properly into the surrounding architecture. It predates the ziggurat. The building was constructed around it, not the other way around. So what is it? Ereshkigal asks. Who built it? We don't know. It was already here when the first humans arrived at this location. Everything we've built is an attempt to interface with what was already present. The implications of this settle over the group slowly. They're not training to operate human technology. They're training to interface with something non-human, something ancient, something that was designed by and for purposes that may have nothing to do with human needs. Then why does it respond to us? Utnapishtim asks. His voice is quiet, hesitant, as if he's not used to speaking in groups. If it wasn't built for humans, why does it need human operators? This is the central mystery. Inmerker doesn't have a complete answer, but he has pieces. I think it was built by the visitors, the ones who appear in the forbidden histories, the ones who are officially denied but that some of us have encountered. They built the network, the global system that this node is part of. But they built it to be operated by local intelligence, whatever form that intelligence takes. On this planet, that's humans. We're not the intended users. We're the available users. So we're accidental operators of alien technology, Gilgamesh summarizes. Not exactly accidental. I think we were recruited, trained, gradually brought into the operational framework over generations. The visitors needed local agents, and humans were capable enough to be trained for the role. But now the visitors are gone, Ninhursag says. I can feel their absence, like an empty space where something used to be. They withdrew. Yes, before the major collapse. They knew it was coming and they left. Or they went dormant, or they retreated to wherever they came from. The historical accounts are unclear. Why did they leave? Several people ask simultaneously. Inmerker chooses his words carefully. I don't know if they left by choice or by necessity. The network is failing. The polar nodes are collapsing. Maybe they left because they couldn't maintain the system anymore. Maybe they left because they were never meant to stay permanently. Or maybe they left because they wanted us to learn to operate independently, and the only way to force that learning was to withdraw support. That's a cruel way to teach independence, Inanna observes. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way. You never learn to operate without support until the support is actually gone. The training continues for 3 hours. By the end, all 8 trainees can reliably detect the hum, can sense the subtle variations in system state, can feel the wrongness that indicates degradation. They're becoming living instruments, biological sensors that complement technological measurements. But more than that, they're becoming witnesses. People who can observe and document what's happening in ways that pure instrumental data cannot capture. As they prepare to leave the chamber, Gilgamesh approaches the central mechanism and places his hand on it, mimicking the gesture he's seen Inmerker perform. Don't. Inmerker starts, but it's too late. Gilgamesh's eyes widen. His breathing becomes rapid and shallow. For 15 seconds he remains frozen in contact with the mechanism, experiencing something that Inmerker can only guess at. When he finally removes his hand, his expression has changed. Hardened. Determined. It's not dead, he says. The network. It's dying, yes. But it's not dead yet. And dying things can sometimes be healed if you intervene aggressively enough. Gilgamesh. I know what you're going to say. that we don't understand the technology well enough to risk intervention, that trying to repair it might accelerate the collapse. But consider this. What if doing nothing guarantees failure, while intervention only might cause failure? Isn't a small chance better than no chance? Merkur doesn't have a good answer to this, because Gilgamesh is right that passive observation guarantees the eventual outcome they're trying to avoid. But he's also potentially wrong about intervention being lower risk than inaction. We'll discuss this with the senior priests, Merkur says finally. This isn't a decision we make alone. But he knows, even as he says it, that Gilgamesh isn't going to wait for institutional approval. He's going to act. The only question is whether his action will be constructive or catastrophic. Part 17. The Night Visitor. That night, Merkur is wakened by a sensation he's learned to recognize. Contact. Not physical contact. Not even really sensory contact. Something that bypasses normal perception entirely and manifests directly in consciousness. He's no longer in his sleeping quarters. Or rather, his body is still there, but his awareness is elsewhere. Chamber 7 again. But not as it exists now. As it existed before. Or perhaps as it exists simultaneously in some other layer of reality that overlaps with the physical. The chamber is pristine. The mechanisms are fully functional. And the visitor is present. It has the same non-physical form as before. Humanish but not human. Existing in more dimensions than the three-dimensional space can properly contain. This time, the communication is clearer. More detailed. As if Merkur's sensitivity has developed enough to receive more complex transmissions. You are progressing correctly. You have identified others with compatible perception. This is necessary for what comes next. The network is entering terminal phase. Polar systems will fail completely within one solar cycle. 1 solar cycle. 1 year. The timeline is more compressed than anyone in the hierarchy has admitted. When polar systems fail, all tertiary nodes will lose external support. You will be isolated, operating on local reserves only. Local reserves will sustain function for approximately 12 more solar cycles. 12 years. That's all they have. Not centuries. Not generations. 12 years of local operation before complete system failure. Your role is not to prevent this. Your role is to preserve knowledge through the transition. The technology will fail. The network will collapse. But the knowledge of what was, if preserved correctly, will enable eventual reconstruction. Not in your lifetime. Not in your descendants' lifetimes. Not in your lifetime. Not in your descendants' lifetimes. But eventually, humanity will rebuild. When they do, they will need this knowledge. You are creating seeds. Seeds that will germinate in soil you will never see. Merkur tries to form a question. Why are you telling me this? Why not speak to the senior priests? Why communicate through dreams and visions instead of direct interaction? The visitor responds to the unspoken questions. We are constrained. Direct intervention violates protocols established before your species existed. We can guide. We can inform. We cannot control. You must choose your own path, even when that path leads to failure. This is the fundamental law. Intelligence must be self-determining or it is not truly intelligence. There's a sadness in this communication. Or perhaps that's Merkur projecting human emotion onto something that doesn't experience emotions the way humans do. But there's definitely something that feels like regret. As if the visitor wishes they could do more but are genuinely bound by constraints they cannot or will not violate. One more thing. The sealed chamber contains emergency override. It can force short-term stability, but at significant cost. Cost to the network. Cost to the operator. Cost that may exceed benefit. Your hierarchy will face choice. Allow natural failure, or force temporary extension through override. Both paths lead to eventual collapse. But the manner of collapse matters. Natural failure. Slower, more documentation time, better preparation. Forced extension. Faster terminal phase, less adaptation time, more catastrophic end. Choose wisely. The vision begins to fade. Merker tries to hold on to it, to ask more questions, to get more clarity. But the connection is dissolving, and he's being pulled back into his physical body, back into the sleeping quarters, back into the mundane reality of the ziggurat at night. He wakes gasping, sweat-soaked, heart racing. The other initiates in the sleeping quarters are still asleep. The night continues its scheduled progression. Nothing has changed externally. But everything has changed for Merker. They have 12 years. Not centuries. 12 years before complete local failure. And they have a choice to make about the sealed chamber. Use the override and potentially buy a few more years but risk catastrophic collapse. Or let the system fail naturally and use the time they have to prepare for life without it. He knows he needs to tell Enshikashana. This information is too important to keep private. But he also knows what will happen when he reports it. The hierarchy will debate. They'll question his interpretation. They'll want verification that he cannot provide because the visitor communication doesn't work that way. And while they debate, time will continue its inexorable progression toward failure. He lies back down but doesn't try to sleep. He spends the remaining hours until dawn thinking about seeds and soil he'll never see, about knowledge preserved for descendants who won't understand what they've inherited, about the weight of being a witness to the end of an age. Act 3. Conclusion: The Sky's Answer. Part 18. The Report. Dawn arrives with mechanical inevitability. Merker performs his calibration routine, but his mind is elsewhere. He needs to report what he learned, but he needs to do it carefully. The visitor communications are officially denied by the hierarchy. Admitting to them might discredit his other observations. He decides to frame it differently, not as communication from visitors, but as intuitive synthesis of observed data. Let them interpret it as unusually accurate sensitivity rather than as direct transmission of information. During the morning meal, he requests a private meeting with Enshikashana and Lugalbanda. They meet in the small consultation room on level 6, where sensitive discussions happen away from the general archives and observation logs. I need to report a significant observation, Merker begins carefully. Based on accumulated sensory data from the deep chambers and the pattern of recent anomalies, I believe we have less time than previously estimated. Enshikashana's expression is carefully neutral. Explain your reasoning. The polar system degradation is accelerating. The hesitation we observed during the evening alignment was not a local anomaly. It was a symptom of primary node failure. Based on the pattern and intensity, I estimate complete polar collapse within 1 year. After that, we'll be operating on local reserves only, which will sustain us for approximately 12 more years before complete system failure. The silence that follows is heavy. Lugalbanda speaks first. Those are very specific numbers. Very confident predictions. Based on what data? This is the dangerous moment. Merker chooses his words carefully. Based on accumulated sensory observations, cross-referenced against historical patterns from the archive study, and extrapolated using the degradation curves that are evident in the instrumental data. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. It's not technically a lie. All of those things support his conclusion. He's just not mentioning that the actual source is direct communication from a non-human intelligence. Enshikashana and Lugalbanda exchange glances. That silent communication between people who have worked together for decades. We've been running similar calculations. Enchikashana says finally. Our projections are less precise than yours, but they're in the same general range. Polar collapse within 2 to 3 years. Local reserves lasting 10 to 15 years. Your timeline is more compressed, but not impossibly so. You already knew, Merker says. It's not quite an accusation. We suspected. We've been tracking the acceleration for years. But we haven't shared the full projections because... She pauses, searching for words. Because what purpose would it serve? Announcing a 12-year countdown to collapse? Creating panic without offering solutions? It would give people time to prepare, time to adapt, time to develop alternative systems. 12 years is not enough time to develop alternative systems for a civilization that has depended on this technology for millennia. And announcing the timeline would likely accelerate social collapse before technical collapse. Better to manage the transition gradually, maintaining stability as long as possible. Merker sees the logic but doesn't agree with it. So the plan is to keep operating normally until failure happens, then deal with consequences reactively? The plan, Lugalbanda says firmly, is to preserve knowledge, train successors, document everything thoroughly, and position the next generation to survive what we cannot prevent. That's not reactive. That's strategic acceptance of constraints we cannot change. What about the sealed chamber? Merker asks. The override mechanism. Can't we use that to extend the timeline? Another long silence. You know about the override, Enchikashana says. Not a question. Statement of fact. I know there's an emergency mechanism in the sealed chamber. I know it could force temporary stability. And I know there are significant costs involved. Costs including potential operator mortality, accelerated terminal degradation, and risk of catastrophic rather than gradual failure, Enchikashana lists. Yes, we've considered it. And our current position is that the risks exceed the benefits. Buying 3 or 4 additional years at the cost of potentially turning a manageable decline into a catastrophic collapse is not a trade we're willing to make. What if we don't have a choice? What if the system fails faster than projected and we need emergency stabilization? Then we'll reconsider. But until forced to it, we maintain current course. Managed decline, maximum documentation, preparation for post-network operation. Merker understands the institutional logic, but he also understands that institutional logic doesn't account for individual initiative. Like Gilgamesh, who is almost certainly planning unauthorized intervention. One of my trainees is considering independent action, Merker says, attempting repairs without authorization. I need guidance on how to handle that. Enchikashana's expression hardens. Unauthorized system intervention is strictly forbidden. If he attempts it, he'll be removed from all operational positions and possibly exiled from the ziggurat entirely. Even if his intervention might work, especially if it might work, because unauthorized intervention that accidentally succeeds is more dangerous than intervention that fails. It establishes precedent that procedures can be ignored if outcomes justify them. That kind of precedent destroys institutional discipline. This is the core of the conflict. The hierarchy values procedural discipline over outcome flexibility. They would rather fail according to protocol than succeed through improvisation. Merker is beginning to understand that he exists outside this framework. He's been positioned at the margins specifically because he doesn't fully accept institutional logic. And that marginalization is about to become very important. I'll monitor the situation, Merker says. But I can't guarantee I can prevent him from acting. You're not responsible for controlling him, Lugalbanda says. You're only responsible for reporting his intentions so we can respond appropriately. The meeting concludes with careful formality. But as Enmerkar leaves, Enshikashana calls him back. You received direct communication, didn't you? She asks quietly. Not sensory observation. Not data extrapolation. Direct transmission from the visitors. There's no point in lying to someone with her experience. Yes. I suspected. The precision of your timeline. The confidence of your projections. That only comes from direct source. She pauses, considering. I've received such communication myself. Twice in my life. Both times at critical moments. I know it's real. I also know we can't officially acknowledge it because most people can't receive such communication and will think we're delusional if we claim it. So we keep it secret. We keep it secret publicly while acting on it privately. Yes. That's how institutional knowledge works when the knowledge source is not institutionally acceptable. Did your visitor tell you anything about what comes after? After the collapse. Enshikashana's expression becomes distant, as if remembering something painful. They told me that forgetting is not failure. That losing knowledge is part of the cycle. That humanity will rebuild, will rediscover, will eventually reconnect with the network, but it will be their accomplishment, not inherited from us. They told me that our role is to make sure the seeds survive, even if we don't get to see the harvest. Do you believe that? That humanity will rebuild? I have to believe it. Because the alternative is accepting that everything we've done, everything we've maintained, everything we've sacrificed for, all of it is meaningless. I'm not willing to accept that. So yes, I believe it. Even when I'm not sure. This is the closest thing to vulnerability that Enmerkar has ever seen from the head priest. It makes her more human. And somehow more reliable. Because someone who doubts but continues anyway is more trustworthy than someone who never questions. What should I do? Enmerkar asks. Continue your work. Train the sensitives. Document everything. And when the crisis comes, and it will come, be ready to act. Not according to protocol. According to necessity. You're being prepared for a role that doesn't exist in our current framework. When the framework collapses, that role will become essential. She returns to her duties, leaving Enmerkar with more questions than answers, but also with a clearer sense of purpose. He's not being trained to maintain the system. He's being trained to survive its collapse and carry knowledge forward. Part 19. Gilgamesh's Plan. 3 days pass. The sensitivity training continues. The daily alignments proceed with increasing difficulty but no catastrophic failures. The system continues its slow, steady degradation. And Gilgamesh disappears. Not officially. He's still present at scheduled observations, still participates in training, still maintains the appearance of normal routine. But during unscheduled hours, he's gone. And when Enmerkar tries to find him, there are gaps. Unexplained absences. Periods where no one seems to know where he is. Enmerkar knows what this means. Gilgamesh is conducting unauthorized research. Exploring restricted areas. Possibly attempting interventions. He finds Gilgamesh finally on the evening of the 3rd day, in one of the deep storage chambers on level 1 where old, broken instruments are kept. Equipment that failed generations ago, that couldn't be repaired, that has been preserved in case someday the knowledge needed to fix it is rediscovered. Gilgamesh is surrounded by disassembled components, ancient tablets spread out before him, comparing physical artifacts with written descriptions with the kind of intense focus that suggests he's been at this for hours. You're going to get yourself exiled, Enmerkar says from the doorway. Gilgamesh doesn't look up. Only if they catch me doing something explicitly forbidden. Currently, I'm just studying archived equipment. That's not against protocol. Studying archived equipment with the intention of figuring out how to repair active systems is absolutely against protocol. Then they'll have to prove my intention. And intention is subjective. Gilgamesh finally looks up, his expression intense. I've been comparing the failed components with the operational ones, and I found something interesting. Despite his better judgment, Inmerker is curious. What? The failed components didn't break. They degraded. Lost precision gradually over time. But the degradation pattern is consistent across multiple components, which means it's not random wear, it's systemic. Something about the operational environment is causing uniform degradation. We already know the system is degrading. Yes, but we don't know why. Or more specifically, we don't know what the failure mode is. If I can identify the specific degradation mechanism, maybe I can counteract it, slow it down, maybe even reverse it locally. Inmerker sits down across from Gilgamesh, studying the assembled components. They're intricate, hybrid constructions of stone and metal and something that's neither, held together with engineering principles that seem half mechanical and half organic. Even if you identify the mechanism, Inmerker says carefully, you don't have the materials or knowledge to fabricate replacement components. And you can't experiment on active systems without risking catastrophic failure. I'm not planning to experiment on active systems. I'm planning to experiment on failed systems. Reactivate a component that's already dead. If I can make a broken instrument functional again, even temporarily, that proves the degradation can be reversed. And if your experiment fails, then I've broken something that was already broken. No harm done. And if it succeeds, Gilgamesh's expression becomes complicated. Then I'll have proven that the hierarchy is wrong. That failure is not inevitable. That with effort and courage and willingness to risk, we might be able to save what they've already given up on. This is the core of their disagreement. The hierarchy has accepted managed decline as the only realistic option. Gilgamesh refuses to accept it, sees any acceptance as surrender. You realize, Inmerker says slowly, that if you succeed, they'll suppress your success. Because your success undermines their entire strategic framework. They've built their authority on the premise that they're managing an inevitable decline. If decline is not inevitable, then their management is unnecessary. Let them try to suppress it. If I can demonstrate functional repair, other people will see it. Other people will want to learn. You can't suppress knowledge that solves real problems. You absolutely can suppress knowledge. Happens constantly. Knowledge that threatens power structures gets suppressed, discredited, or reinterpreted until it's harmless. Then I'll make the knowledge too widespread to suppress. I'll teach everyone. I'll document everything. I'll make repair knowledge so common that suppression becomes impossible. Inmerker sees the idealism in this and doesn't want to crush it. But he also sees the naivety. Gilgamesh, even if you're right about repair being possible, and I'm not sure you are, the amount of time and resources needed to repair an entire global network using techniques we're developing from scratch is probably more time than we have before complete collapse. The mathematics don't work in your favor. Mathematics based on assumptions that repair is impossible. If repair is possible, the whole timeline changes. Or repair is possible but so resource-intensive that we'd have to sacrifice everything else to pursue it. Food production, social stability, basic maintenance. If we devote all resources to saving the network, we might destroy the civilization the network supports. Gilgamesh is silent for a long moment, staring at the components spread before him. So what's your solution? He asks finally. Just accept collapse? Just document the decline and wait for the end? My solution is to prepare for life after collapse. Preserve knowledge, yes, but also develop alternative systems that don't depend on the network. Teach people to operate independently. Make the transition survivable even if it's not preventable. That's not a solution. That's surrender dressed up as pragmatism. Maybe. Or maybe it's wisdom dressed up as surrender. The difference is hard to tell from inside the situation. They sit in the dusty storage chamber, surrounded by the broken remnants of technology neither of them fully understands, arguing about choices that neither of them has the authority to make. Finally, Merker makes a decision. I won't report you. Yet. You can continue your research. But on 3 conditions. First, you document everything thoroughly. If you discover anything, that knowledge gets preserved regardless of whether your repair attempts succeed. Second, you don't experiment on any active systems without authorization. Broken components only. Third, if you achieve any success, you tell me immediately before going public. Let me help you present it in a way that doesn't get you immediately exiled. Gilgamesh considers this. You're protecting me. I'm protecting the knowledge you might generate. Whether that knowledge is repair is possible, or repair is impossible but we tried, either way it's valuable. But only if you survive long enough to document it properly. Fair enough. Gilgamesh extends his hand in the formal gesture of agreement. Merker clasps it, sealing an alliance that probably violates protocol but feels necessary anyway. They're no longer just witnesses to decline. They're active participants in the response to it, even if they can't agree on what that response should be. Part 20. The Sky's Final Answer. 2 days later, during the evening alignment, the crisis comes. All the preparations, all the monitoring, all the careful observation of degradation patterns. None of it prevents what happens next. The operation begins normally. 6 priests at their stations. Merker in the central position. The 8 trained sensitives stationed around the chamber perimeter. Full documentation protocols active. Bronze plate. Pure tone. Vertical tube. Harmonic response. Crystal prism. Light pattern. The sequence proceeds, and initially everything seems stable. The connection forms. The system responds. The alignment achieves synchronization. But at minute 17, something changes. The connection doesn't hesitate this time. It collapses. Completely. Instantly. Without warning. The pressure from the shaft vanishes. The hum that has been omnipresent for as long as anyone can remember goes silent. The harmonics that the priests are generating scatter into meaningless noise because there's nothing responding to them anymore. For 5 seconds, there is absolute silence in the chamber. And then, from the 7th level above them, a sound begins. Not mechanical. Not organic. Something in between. A resonance that builds an intensity that makes the stone itself vibrate, that bypasses hearing and goes straight into the nervous system. The sealed chamber is activating. Not responding. Activating. Taking independent initiative. Emergency shutdown. Lugal Banda shouts. All operators stand down immediately. The priests abandon their positions with trained discipline. The sensitives press themselves against the walls, overwhelmed by the sensory input. Merker remains in the center position, because he's the only one who can withstand the full intensity of what's happening. The sealed chamber is attempting override. Forcing system response. Trying to compensate for the loss of external connection by drawing on some kind of emergency reserve that no one living has seen used before. And it's working. Partially. The hum returns, but different. Higher pitched, more strained, like a machine operating far beyond design specifications. The connection reforms. Not smooth. Not stable. But present. The alignment is being forced to succeed despite the primary system failure. But in Merkur can feel the cost. This is not sustainable. The emergency override is burning through local reserves at a catastrophic rate. And more than that, it's drawing power from somewhere else. From the operators themselves. He can feel energy draining out of him. Not physical energy. Something deeper. Consciousness. Life force. Some aspect of human presence that the system can metabolize when necessary. The 6 priests at their stations are swaying, pale, struggling to remain standing. The sensitives around the perimeter are in various states of distress. One has collapsed entirely. This is what the visitor warned about. The sealed chamber can force short-term stability, but at significant cost. Cost to the network. Cost to the operators. In Merkur makes a decision that will define everything that comes after. He reaches out with his consciousness, not his hand, his actual awareness, and touches the override mechanism. Not to operate it, to communicate with it. The response is immediate and overwhelming. The chamber is not empty technology. It contains something that is not quite artificial intelligence but not quite absent consciousness either. Something that was placed here by the visitors as a failsafe, an emergency measure to be used only when all other options have failed. And it's offering him a choice. Accept full override. Force system stability. By additional years of operation. Cost. Accelerated terminal phase and significant operator sacrifice. Or reject override. Allow natural failure. Begin immediate transition to post-network operation. Cost. Immediate loss of current capabilities but slower, more survivable collapse. The sealed chamber is asking in Merkur to decide. Not the hierarchy. Not Enshikushana. Not the institutional framework. Him. Specifically. Because he's the one in the central position, the one with enough sensitivity to interface directly, the one who can handle the full override connection. He has perhaps 3 seconds to choose before the emergency activation completes and the decision is made by default. 3 seconds to determine the fate of civilization for the next decade. He thinks of Enshikushana's words. Preparation over prevention. Seeds for soil we'll never see. He thinks of the visitor's warning. Natural failure gives more time to adapt. He thinks of the 6 priests draining their life force to power a system that's dying anyway. He chooses. Reject. The word forms in his consciousness with absolute clarity. The sealed chamber acknowledges the command. The override halts mid-activation. The emergency protocols disengage. The forced connection collapses. The hum dies completely. The pressure vanishes. The system that has operated for countless millennia goes permanently silent. In the space of 3 heartbeats, the technological age ends. The priests collapse as the energy drain stops. The sensitives slump against the walls. In Merkur remains standing in the center of the chamber, feeling the enormous weight of what he just decided. Lugal Banda is the first to recover enough to speak. What did you do? I rejected the override, in Merkur says. His voice sounds distant, disconnected. The sealed chamber offered emergency stabilization. I refused it. The system is now fully offline. You refused it? Enshikushana has appeared in the doorway, her face pale but her posture rigid with control. You made that decision unilaterally? Someone had to. The chamber was asking me specifically. I chose the option that didn't sacrifice the operators and didn't risk catastrophic terminal phase. I chose managed collapse over forced extension. You chose to end our civilization. No. I chose to end our dependence on technology we don't understand and can't maintain. The civilization continues. Differently. But it continues. The silence that follows is profound. Everyone in the chamber understands what just happened. The careful plans for managed decline over 12 years just collapsed into immediate transition. Ready or not, they're now living in the post-network age. Enshikashana approaches Inmerker slowly, studying him with an expression that is impossible to read. "You were put in that position deliberately," she says finally. "Lugal Banda and I discussed it. We knew the sealed chamber might activate during your watch. We knew it would offer choice to the person in central position. We positioned you there specifically because we believed you would make the right decision when the moment came. You knew this would happen. You prepared for it. We prepared for the possibility. We hoped it wouldn't come so soon. But yes, we knew. And we chose you because you're not fully integrated into the hierarchy. Because you can make decisions based on principle rather than institutional preservation. You used me. We trusted you. There's a difference." Inmerker wants to be angry but can't quite manage it. Because they were right to trust him. He made the decision they would have wanted him to make but couldn't have made themselves because of institutional constraints. "What happens now?" he asks. "Now," Enshikashana says, "we announce to the city that the system has failed. We implement the continuity plans we've been developing for decades. We transition from technological civilization to whatever comes next. And we begin the work of preserving knowledge for descendants who will need it in ways we can't predict." Just like that. No panic. No chaos. Oh, there will be panic. There will be chaos. But we've been preparing for this. We have contingency systems, alternative agricultural schedules, emergency protocols. It won't be smooth, but it will be survivable. She turns to address everyone in the chamber. The network has failed. This is not a temporary anomaly. This is permanent system collapse. You all understand what this means. You've been trained for this possibility. Now the training becomes reality. We document everything that happened here. We preserve this knowledge. And we begin the work of teaching our city to operate without the support we've depended on for millennia. The priests and sensitives absorb this with varying degrees of shock, acceptance, and determination. Gilgamesh, who has been silent until now, speaks up. "The failed components I've been studying. The repair techniques I've been developing. They're useless now, aren't they?" "Not useless," Inmerker says. "Redirected. You're not repairing a living system anymore. You're learning to understand dead technology well enough to document it properly. That knowledge will matter to people who come centuries after us." Cold comfort. Better than no comfort. The group disperses slowly. Return to quarters. Rest. Process. Tomorrow the real work begins, not of maintaining an operational system, but of managing the aftermath of its failure. Inmerker remains in the chamber, alone except for Lugal Banda. "Did I do the right thing?" Inmerker asks finally. "I don't know," Lugal Banda says honestly. "The override might have worked. Might have bought us years. Might have allowed more gradual transition. Or it might have failed catastrophically and killed half the people in this ziggurat. You chose what seemed right in the moment. That's all anyone can do. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's what we have." They stand together in the silent chamber, two witnesses to the end of an age, and feel the weight of everything that has just changed. Above them, the stars continue their movements, uncaring, eternal, following patterns that will persist long after human civilization has forgotten it once had the technology to measure them precisely. The sky that once answered has gone silent, and humanity must learn to live with the silence. Epilogue. 3 days after. The city adjusts with surprising resilience. This is not because the loss doesn't matter. It matters enormously. The alignment operations are cancelled. The careful timing of agricultural schedules is disrupted. The precision that governed every aspect of life is gone. But humans are adaptable. And the priests, having prepared for this possibility for decades, implement their contingency protocols with disciplined efficiency. Alternative calendars based on purely observational astronomy. Simplified agricultural timing using traditional methods that don't require technological precision. Redistribution of food reserves to handle the transition period. It's not elegant. It's not optimal. But it works. Merker spends these 3 days in the archives with Shara, working frantically to document everything they know about the system before memory fades and details are lost. They work 18 hours a day, transcribing observations onto clay tablets that will be preserved in the deep storage chambers. Technical descriptions. Operational procedures. Sensory experiences. Everything they can capture about what the technology was and how it functioned. On the 3rd day, Enshikushana summons Merker to the 7th level, to the sealed chamber, which is now open. The door, which has been sealed for generations, stands ajar. Beyond it, darkness and the faint scent of ozone. We need to document what's inside, Enshikushana says, before the emergency reserves completely discharge. You're the most sensitive. You're the most likely to understand what you're seeing. Will you enter? Merker approaches the threshold slowly. Beyond the door is a chamber smaller than he expected, perhaps 5 meters across. The walls are the same hybrid material as the mechanisms below. Not quite stone, not quite metal, something in between. In the center, a structure that looks like a chair, or throne, or operating position, surrounded by interfaces that seem designed to connect with a human body. Neural integration points. Consciousness bridges. The technology that allows direct human-system interface. This is what would have been required to operate the override. Full neural connection. Complete immersion in the system. Consciousness merged with network operation. And Merker realizes, if he had accepted the override, this is where he would have ended up. Sitting in that chair. Connected directly to the failing network. His consciousness distributed across the system, holding it together through pure force of will and sacrifice of individual identity. Some of him would have remained in his body, but most of him would have been in the network. Part human, part system. Neither fully one nor fully the other. The priests who attempted this in previous generations, the ones who came back changed. This is what changed them. They gave up part of their humanity to sustain the technology for a few more years. I made the right choice, Merker says quietly. Enshikushana nods. I believe so. Though we'll never know for certain what the alternative would have been. They document the chamber thoroughly. Measurements. Descriptions. Sketches of the interface mechanisms. Everything preserved for descendants who might someday understand what it represents. As they work, Merker notices something. Scratched into the wall beside the threshold, barely visible, a message in ancient script. We who came before made the same choice. Natural end over forced continuation. May those who come after understand we chose preservation of humanity over preservation of power. The message is dated. Not in years, in cycles. Approximately 2,800 years before present. This isn't the first time the network has failed. It's not even the second time. This is a cycle that has repeated multiple times across human history. Each time, the operators face the same choice. Each time, someone decides between forced extension or natural collapse. And each time, apparently, they choose humanity over technology. We're not alone, Merker says, showing Enshikushana the inscription. She reads it carefully, her expression complex. No, we're not. We're part of a long line of people who faced this crisis and made the hard choice. The knowledge that we're not the first might be the most important thing we preserve. Because it means we're not failures, we're participants in a recurring cycle. They complete the documentation and seal the chamber again. Not with the original seal, that technology is dead now, but with good stone and mortar, preserving what's inside for whenever it needs to be rediscovered. As they descend from the 7th level, Merkur looks out over the city. Life continues. Different now, but continuing. Children play in the streets. Farmers work the fields. Merchants trade goods. The rhythms of human life persist even without the technological foundation that once supported them. And Merkur realizes, this is what matters. Not the technology. Not the network. Not the precise alignments and careful operations. The people. The culture. The knowledge they create and preserve and pass forward. The network was never the civilization. It was just a tool the civilization used. And when the tool breaks, the civilization adapts. What happens next? Merkur asks. Next, Enchikashana says, we teach a new generation to live without what we had. We preserve what can be preserved. We adapt to changed circumstances. And we remember that this has happened before and will probably happen again. Humanity's story is not linear progress. It's cycles of rise and fall and rise again. We're privileged to witness one turning of the cycle. Future generations will witness others. That's a long view. It's the only view that makes sense when you're living through the end of an age. They return to their work. Documentation. Preservation. Preparation for a future neither of them will see. The sky above remains unchanged. The same stars. The same movements. The same eternal dance of celestial mechanics. But the sky no longer answers human signals. And perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps humanity needs to learn to live without the constant validation of technological response. To develop independence rather than dependence. To become fully self-determining rather than merely self-maintaining. The age of alignment has ended. The age of adaptation is beginning. And in the archives of the ziggurat, on thousands of clay tablets, in careful script that will survive for millennia, the story of what was is being preserved for those who will come after and wonder. What was lost? What was learned? What matters? The answers are there, waiting to be discovered by descendants who don't yet know they'll need them. Seeds planted in soil no one alive will see, but planted nonetheless, with care and hope and the stubborn human refusal to let knowledge die even when systems fail. This is the first chapter of a longer story. The story of how humanity lives through collapse and carries forward anyway. The story of witnesses and documenters and those who choose preservation over panic. The story that will be retold in different forms, different contexts, different ages. But always with the same core truth. When the sky stops answering, humanity must learn to answer for itself. And in that learning perhaps find something more valuable than any technology could provide. The sky is beginning to fail, and the age of alignment is coming to an end. We are documenting the final weeks before the polar collapse, the moment where instructions become prayers and history becomes myth. If you want to help preserve the technical truth before it is rewritten, hit subscribe to join the archive. The next stage of the collapse is already unfolding. Click right here to witness the next chapter.